G'day, how's it going? I've got three stories for you. We're going to be talking about unwanted guests, stalkers, and UFOs on tonight's yarn. Two of the following stories are real, one of them's make believe. Can you tell reality from fiction? I made a solo camping trip to the isolated Pine Ridge National Park late in the summer. I've always been fascinated by nature. I was looking forward to spending several days immersed in nature under the stars. The night sky has always held a special place in my heart, and I spent countless nights stargazing. I chose a nice clearing in the trees for my campsite. The first night passed without incident. I enjoyed a little campfire, roasted marshmallows, and listened to the soothing sounds of nature. However, I noticed the stars flickering strangely, almost as if they were out of place. Lulled by the calming rustle of the trees, I shrugged it off as my eyes were just playing tricks on me. It was getting late, so I crawled into my tent for the night. I woke sharply around 3 a.m. and I had this feeling of unease. The forest was oddly silent. Lying in my tent, I noticed a weak light pulsating intermittently outside. Curiosity overwhelmed me as I undid the tent flap to look out. What I saw sent shivers down my spine. Just above the treetops hovered a large disc-shaped object. A sinister glow illuminating the clearing, it vibrated through my bones and emitted a low hum. I felt paralysed, unable to avert my gaze as the light shifted from a soft white to a brilliant blue, flooding the area with an otherworldly radiance. The hum intensified suddenly, and my heart raced as I staggered back. An overwhelming urge compelled me to approach the strange light, despite every instinct screaming for me to flee. I felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. As I stepped closer, I observed that the object had no visible seams or marks, just a smooth, polished surface that reflected the stars above. Without warning, the light flared brightly, blinding me momentarily. Covering my eyes, I opened them again to find the object had vanished, leaving only a profound silence in its wake. Frantically, I raced back to my tent, my head spinning with fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, as though the very trees were quietly observing my every movement. The next day, I tried to put the experience behind me. I hiked through the park, appreciating its beauty, but the unease lingered. As dusk fell, I set up camp again, but sleep eluded me. I started to question my sanity, replaying the previous night's events in my mind. Around midnight, the humming began, faint at first, but steadily rising in volume. My pulse quickened. I didn't need to look for the light this time. I already knew it was back. With cautious resolve, I peeked outside while grabbing my flashlight. This time, the object floated even closer, hovering right above my campsite. My mind raced. Should I run or confront this mysterious presence? The light expanded, filling my tent with an unearthly glow, and I stood frozen at the entrance. The ground shook beneath me, and I saw shapes emerging from the light with swift grace. They were tall and thin, their features sharply defined by the blinding illumination. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee. As I sprinted through the woods, the deep drone intensified, entwining with whispering sound that sent chills down my spine. Though the words were almost indistinct, the tone felt urgent, almost pleading. Desperately, I searched for a way out, crashing through the underbrush, flailing at the branches that tore at my skin. Suddenly, I stumbled and fell, my surroundings spinning in a chaotic blur. Panting, I looked up to see sunlight pouring down from directly overhead. The figures had come closer. They were now vividly defined, yet still shrouded in mystery. A wave of anticipation crashed over me. In that heartbeat, everything went silent. The humming ceased and the shapes stood motionless, as if they were waiting for something. My heart raced. Without any warning, a brilliant flash engulfed me, and the world went dark. When I awoke, it was dawn. The sun had just risen above the trees, casting its golden light into the clearing. Confused, I rose and looked around. My campsite seemed undisturbed, but the eerie events of the night before imprinted themselves in my mind. For the first time, I noticed an unusual mark on my wrist. I hurried to pack my gear and left Pine Ridge, glancing back at the trees that felt like mute sentinels. The echoes of whispers resonated in my mind, and as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being under surveillance. I examined the mark on my wrist, lingering in my thoughts. In the weeks that followed, I attempted to return to my routine, but I became fixated on answers. Diving into research about Pine Ridge, I uncovered decades of strange occurrences. Vanished people, mysterious lights, eerie sounds, and UFO sightings. The mark on my wrist wouldn't fade. When I shared my experience, no one believed me. Friends dismissed it as a camping nightmare, but I saw through the skepticism. The watchers were real and still lurking, waiting for the next curious soul to wander into their realm. The memory of that night tortured me, and the weight of the unseen eyes followed me everywhere. Each time I looked at my wrist, I noticed the mark changed over time. My life's purpose shifted, and the feeling of vigilance never waned. I live in a small Midwestern town with a population of around 400. This must have started around 6 or 7 years ago when I was around 13. My grandpa has owned a small house just off the highway, right smack dab in the middle of town, for over 30 years now. Around COVID times, my aunt moved in with him. My grandpa is a truck driver, so he's gone for a good chunk of time. I would stay with my aunt for quite a bit. We had no Wi Fi, so most of our pastimes were spent colouring, listening to music and telling stories, mostly family stories. Around this time, we would sometimes hear the usual bumps in the night. One night, while my aunt was alone, she said she heard the sound of metal jangling, but ignored it. Now a few days go by. My grandpa comes home and decides to check the lock. The lock seems to be fine, but when he tries to unlock it, the thing just fell to the ground in pieces, as if someone cut it, and when they were leaving, placed it to where it looked like nothing had to happen. So my granddad tells my aunt about the findings. My aunt concludes that this must have been what she had heard. The only other big thing that happened then was once my aunt heard her dog, a huge German Shepherd Great Pyrenees, barking uncontrollably outside. When she went out to check, a man was standing over the fence in the backyard. She goes inside to grab a gun. When she goes back outside, the man behind the fence sees the gun and freaks out and takes off running. Around a year later, my aunt moved out for a while. Nothing seemed to happen over at that house, at least that we know of course. There's no way of really knowing, considering my grandpa was at work weeks at a time with no one else in the house. However, over at my house, this was when things started to pick up. My parents worked nights, leaving me and my two younger brothers alone. Their sleep schedule would impact ours a lot, leaving us to stay up until early morning a lot. We would hear the occasional taps on the windows and footsteps outside. Twice things got really bad on my window specifically. Someone had slapped the window by my head while I was sleeping one night. Another time, while my parents were home, the sounds and lights of a camera were coming from right outside. My parents would either look themselves or call a male family member to come look around our house. And not once did they see anything. This all lasts until I'm about 16 and my aunt moves back in with my grandpa. Things are okay for about a year when everything starts back up again. Please note that my uncle moved into our town about a year before my aunt moved back in. Things ramped up a lot. Once, about 2 summers ago, when I was 17, I was half asleep in my room around 2 a.m. when someone started banging on the front door. I've never actually heard the police bang on our door, but it sounds just as it's shown in movies. My dog was going crazy, so I knew I wasn't the only one who heard it, but it was late enough for me to choose to ignore it and try to go back to sleep. But I couldn't, so I got up, and as I was about to step into our kitchen, it happened again. I knew at this point that if it was the police or someone in need of help, they would say something. But it was dead silent apart from the banging, the dog, and my heartbeat. I sat on the floor and called my stepdad, asking for advice, when my brother lazily walked out of his room, asking what's going on. He took my dog and answered the door to be faced with nothing, of course. This summer, I got into the habit of sleeping on the couch when my parents were at work because my friend and I would camp out there. However, one night when it was just me, I woke up around 6 a.m. with both front and back doors completely wide open for no reason. None of our animals had run out, amazingly, so I had to conclude that they had just been opened. This happened a separate time when I unfortunately didn't wake and my mum came home from work in the morning to the doors blown open and all of our pets in the yard to be rounded up. This past year has been horrible for my aunt when she's alone. She was woken in the middle of the night to a man holding a flashlight in her window. She had a small red dot hit her chest from the same window. Came home one night and let her dog out, and when she did that, two major things happened at once. She saw a man start taking off from behind a tree. No dog started eating something that wasn't there before. A dog can be slightly aggressive when it comes to food, so though she tried to take it, she ended up swallowing. The dog later on acted as if she was sick and very tired. She wouldn't eat anything. Her tongue lolled and she cried. My aunt was worried sick, believing whoever was running off from behind the fence threw Benadryl in a burger patty at her dog to put her to sleep. Mind you, the dog is probably her biggest protection when she's alone. Car pulled into the driveway one night. My aunt heard metal jangling again. Then she heard banging coming from the basement door that connects to the house. Her dog barked at whoever was trying to get in that door. And soon after, my aunt heard the car take off again. This time, she says the metal sounded like a cellar door being thrown open. Once when she was painting her closet, she opened the back door to let the fumes out in broad daylight. She never saw anything, but suddenly the dog bounced up and she could hear nails hitting the kitchen tiles as she ran towards the bedroom, then turned around and took off outside, growling and barking at something. Many points in the backyard fence are leaning so far back that it appears someone is bending it back to roll over it, right where the camera conveniently doesn't point, showing that whoever this is knows where the cameras are. Other than my aunt, my grandpa has stories of his own. Twice, when he was home alone, he heard someone banging on the side of his house. And the second time, it sounded to him like they were full body slamming the front door. Both times, he went out to look and no one had been there. But the most important thing, on his security camera, one night while my aunt was pulling into the driveway, there was a man crouched behind the bushes, rolling down the hill out of my aunt's sight as she got out. This is the only time a person has shown up on the cameras. However, it's not the first time they've triggered the motion sensor in them. It happened quite a bit, but they're always just out of view before something happens. Based on all of this information, I originally thought this was just happening to our family for some odd reason, but upon asking some other women in the area, it's not just us. Other women, when they're home alone, have been experiencing similar things. A lady close to my aunt even mentioned someone full on frogging, squatting, and stealing her food at night. I'm not sure why it's happening, or who is doing it, or what's going to happen when they're eventually caught by someone, but it's scary nonetheless. It also seems to be ramping up as time goes by. The latest couple of happenings involving genuine attempts at break-ins, which never happened before my aunt left all those years ago. There's been a lot of theories in my family about who it could be. The first guy seen was, like I said, about 6 years ago, and he looked to be a scrawny teenager, which doesn't fit either of the actual people members of my family have thought it was. My grandpa had a friend when it first started happening, but when he started coming around, when my grandpa was gone and it was just my aunt or me and my aunt, I think she stopped answering the door when it was him because he was creepy. She thought it could have been him back then, but now he's probably in his 70s or 80s, and most likely wouldn't know my aunt was living there again, so that just doesn't make much sense to us. The guy in the security video moves too smoothly for it to be him anyways, as he had and has to use a cane. My mum for a short time, or it could have been my uncle playing a weird prank on us. But when it got to the dog being harmed, we threw that theory way out. He loves that dog, and if she heard and smelled him around, I don't think she would be barking, growling, or chasing after him, considering she knows him well and likes him. He's in good shape, and the man in the video just seems too short and stubby to be him as well. Forgot he wasn't even living in the state when it first started happening. Nowhere near even. Also, the knowledge that this is happening to other people kind of throws us for a loop, to be honest. We don't know who would be doing this in such a small town. where everyone knows each other, he's bound to be caught. Not to mention, people here love their guns. It was around early December that month, an early evening, when my grandma had gone to the mall. She'd gone to the mall to do some early Christmas shopping that year for my family and some of her friends. She was at Macy's in the men's clothing section when it happened. My grandma was looking for some polos and pants when she noticed something out of her peripheral vision. She looks to see what it is and sees that it's a man staring back at her. She describes the man to be somewhat in his mid to late 40s. My grandma, being that kind soul, she just looks at him, gives him a brief smile, and goes back to looking at the clothes. She eventually leaves the area and goes to the men's fragrance department to look at different colognes. While she was checking out the fragrances, she once again notices someone in her peripheral vision, but they're just standing there this time. She looks to see who it is, and it's the same guy from earlier. She glances at the guy and just sees that he's just looking at her with a blank, emotionless expression on his face. My grandma isn't a paranoid person and just chalked the whole thing up as being one major coincidence. She stays in the fragrance department for another 10 minutes or so and goes to the women's section. After being in the women's clothing section for about 15 minutes, she heads over to the women's fragrance department. She's skimming through the different fragrances when she catches a glimpse of someone on the other side of the counter. She looks up out of curiosity to see it's the same exact guy again. My grandma could see the same blank stare he was giving her as he made his way over to the other side of the counter she was at. She watched as he came over to her side, but had just stood about 20 yards away from her. My grandma decides to leave Macy's shortly after and head into the mall to visit the other stores in there. She goes to the first few stores with no incident, but when she makes her way to the fourth store, that's when she notices it. She turns around to see the same creep from Macy's following her. A pit had begun to form on her stomach, and she realised that this guy was bad news and very likely had ill intentions towards her. She goes to the fourth store, which thankfully the guy didn't enter, but she was a bit on edge about it. This went on for a while. Every single time my grandma went to different stores, the creep followed her, but he always kept his distance. My grandma eventually made her way to the bottom of the mall. That's when she decided that she needed to find a way out to get away from this man. She was looking around to see if anyone would help her, until she spotted a security guard not too far ahead. She went up to him, explained her current situation, and asked him to see if he could escort her back to her car. The security guard agreed and escorted her out of the mall and back to her car. The creep saw that my grandma was talking to security and just stood there, not going any further. While they were walking through the mall, the guy still followed them, but at a much further distance than he previously did. During the walk through the mall, the security guy explained to her how my grandma did the right thing and how very lucky she was that day. My grandma questioned him, and the guy explained to her that apparently some lady was stalked through the mall and was abducted shortly after a few months ago. Security went on and explained that they had never found the woman and had yet to find the person who abducted her. It wasn't until my grandma and the security were almost at the exit until the creep lost interest and walked away, completely doing a 160 and going the opposite direction he was going. My grandma thanked the security guard. Security watched her get in her car, made sure she left the parking lot safe, and made sure she wasn't getting followed. My grandma is forever thankful that security was around that day, as she firmly believes that it was her guardian angel protecting her. She also believes that if it wasn't for the security guard who helped her, she could have been abducted and been forced into a human trafficking operation and would have likely never been seen again. Now, my grandma didn't return back to the mall for a very long time after that, just out of fear. She goes to the mall occasionally now, but only when she's with my mum, her friends, or with me for her own safety. Thank you to users donut number 2834 and Leviathan 1909 for allowing us permission to use their stories. And thank you, the viewer, for watching the video. The story that was fake was The Watchers. Moving forward, we will be using this format of 2 truths and a lie stories. Feel free to let us know how we did down in the comments. We post sneak peeks for all upcoming videos on our TikTok and Instagram, both are just nighttime yarns. I'll catch you later.